This happened during Haneul's second year of high school, when she and her friends watched an adult movie for the first time. The girl sat in numbness. She had never thought of such things before. It all began when a classmate invited her friends to a sleepover. Looking for an interesting film among her older brother's DVDs, they came across a curious disc. For the girls, the video was a revelation, though they didn't understand half of what was happening. For Haneul, it all seemed wrong. She looked at the whole process with horror, frightened by the sizing and how physiologically possible it was. But then she saw a scene with a very sensual kiss, and it imprinted itself on her memory forever. She thought she'd like to kiss her lover like that someday. Blushing, she kept looking at the screen through her fingers, thinking it looked amazing. Later, the girls were at a store choosing underwear. A friend held out a set and asked if they liked it. Haneul wondered if it was a bit too revealing, to which her friend replied that that was what made it attractive. She was going on a sleepover trip with her boyfriend and wanted to buy nice lingerie because they were definitely going to do it. Haneul stared at her in confusion and asked what she meant, prompting her friend to make an ambiguous gesture with her hands. Haneul froze while the others continued to discuss the topic. Her friend mentioned that when she and her boyfriend held hands, she realized how big his hands were, so she was looking forward to what was coming. "What do hands have to do with this?" Haneul asked. Her friend laughed, explaining that if a man has big hands, he also has a large package underneath. Haneul blushed, deeply embarrassed. It was the first time she had ever heard of such a thing. Her friend began to tease her for her ignorance, reminding her that they weren't in an all-girls school anymore, but a regular one full of guys. Suddenly, another friend suggested going on a blind date. She mentioned a friend from the physical education department who was surrounded by handsome guys, and he had asked her to bring some friends along. Haneul wondered out loud if this guy was as cute as Jae-sub. Her friend was outraged. How can you compare someone to one of the two hottest guys at uni? Surprised, Haneul asked who the second handsome guy was. Her friend was shocked that she didn't know. It was Kim Mitchell from the business management department, who was even more popular than Jae-sub, with hundreds of comments on his social media. Haneul knew the guy and couldn't believe it. As they left the store, the girls continued to enthusiastically discuss Mitchell, talking about how tall and handsome he was, looking like a celebrity. Haneul disagreed, walking along while complaining that he looked like a bully, whereas Jae-sub was actually nice. Unbeknownst to her, a male figure was standing right behind her. The young guy grabbed her cheeks and pulled them, asking why she was saying such bad things about him. Haneul jumped away like she'd been burned and started yelling at him, asking what the hell he was doing there. While her friend stood by in bewilderment, the guy continued to tease her, ruffling her hair and asking when she became bold enough to talk trash behind his back. The two stood in the middle of the street arguing like children. No one at the university knew the truth yet. These two had been childhood friends for 20 years. Now both in their 20s, they had known each other virtually from birth because their mothers were in the hospital at the same time. As luck would have it, they ended up living near each other, meaning they were together from kindergarten through high school and now at the same university. Fate kept bringing them together. They fought like cat and dog, but they shared a love for PC games, so they spent a lot of time together, bickering like an old married couple even while playing. Once they calmed down, they were always eager to hang out again. At the end of class, their professor assigned a 5-page review of a pre-1990's movie, due before the next lecture. Haneul had her head on her desk and was barely listening, completely missing the details of the assignment. Instead, she was thinking about how she didn't have a boyfriend because Mitchell was always hanging around, his intimidating presence scaring off every guy in her vicinity. When she later realized the size of the assignment, she felt desperate, wondering how she could pull it off in a week. Still, she hummed a song to herself, thinking that university would give her a better chance at falling in love, since she and Mitchell would see less of each other. Just then, a classmate called out to her and invited her to grab dinner. Haneul was thrilled. The guy was cute and friendly. They were walking toward the restaurant when a familiar voice called her name. Mitchell ignored her companion completely, carrying on in his usual tone and scolding her for ignoring his messages. Haneul bristled, saying he had scared her and asking why he was picking on her. He replied that she had been rude lately, but offered to take her to dinner anyway. Surprised, Haneul told him she already had plans with someone else. Mitchell tensed up, asking who she was going with, and turned his gaze toward the frightened classmate standing off to the side. The young man broke into a cold sweat, unable to squeeze out a single word. Mitchell leaned over Haneul and, with a menacing look, asked again if they really had to eat together today. Taking the hint, the terrified classmate quickly took off, wishing them a good evening before hurrying out of sight. Haneul was furious, gritting her teeth in rage, while Mitchell stood behind her smiling, pleased with himself for chasing the guy away. Suddenly, she turned around and kicked him with all her might, screaming that she wasn't going to have dinner with him and blaming him for the fact that she had no friends or boyfriend. Angry, Mitchell yelled back that he was just worried about her and wanted to eat together because he knew she didn't have any friends. They stood arguing in the street for a while longer before telling each other off and going their separate ways. Despite the fight, both knew that the next time they met, it would be business as usual. That was just their friendship. Haneul stood there making obscene gestures at his back, so engrossed that she didn't notice someone sneaking up behind her to scare her. Jae-sun laughed, saying it was always funny when she got startled. As Haneul tried to calm her pounding heart, he asked why she looked so upset. She explained that she had been given a very difficult assignment today. He nodded, mentioning that his class had to write a movie review last year, too. Surprised, Haneul asked how he guessed, and he replied that the professor gave that same task to first-year students every year, adding that he had to work really hard to get a good grade. Discouraged, Haneul confessed she didn't even know which movie to choose. Suddenly, Jae-sun mentioned that he had a few flash drives with suitable movies from last year that he could lend her. Haneul couldn't believe her luck. He then offered to let her come over to his place that evening so she wouldn't waste any time. Thinking luck was finally on her side, she realized she would not only get the movies, but also get to see his apartment. However, upon standing on the threshold of Jae-sun's home, Haneul froze. She was completely unprepared for what was inside, total chaos and filth. She never expected such a nice guy to live in such messy conditions. He asked her to take a seat while he searched for the flash drives, but Haneul felt nauseous, unsure where it was even safe to step. As she stood there frozen, he called her over again. With horror, Haneul sat on a tiny patch of clear floor among the clutter and waited. Jae-sun finally announced that he had found the drives, apologized for taking so long, and offered her some juice in a mug. Handing her the cup, Haneul noticed his hands. They were surprisingly large. Instantly, her friend's theory about hand size matching private areas flashed through her mind, and her face burned bright red. He asked if she was feeling all right, and Haneul stammered that she was fine, awkwardly complimenting him on his large hands. Clutching her cup, she tried to hide her burning face. The guy hesitated and thanked her, feeling it was a strange comment since he thought his hands were pretty normal. Suddenly, he raised his palm, smilingly nodding that his ring finger was longer than his index finger. Haneul sat in utter bewilderment, unsure what he meant by that. Then he leaned in close, far too close to her face, making her incredibly uncomfortable. Jumping to her feet, Haneul declared that it was late and she had to leave. She grabbed the thumb drives, thanked him, wished him a good evening, and hurriedly rushed out. The young man was left sitting there, in total confusion at her sudden change in mood. Haneul walked down the street in high tension, rattled by the strange atmosphere at Jae-sun's apartment. She wondered what on earth he meant by talking about his fingers, speculating if it was some kind of secret guy language. She decided to go straight to Mitchell's place to ask him about it. Haneul burst into his room without warning, complaining about why he hadn't been answering her calls, but stopped dead in her tracks at the scene before her. Mitchell was sitting in a chair with his pants down. Both froze in shock. Sounds of moaning were echoing through the room. Haneul's gaze dropped down, seeing what he was clutching tightly in his hands. It instantly confirmed her friend's theory about big hands. What she saw was truly massive. Haneul was shocked, trying to reassure herself that she had just found the ultimate leverage to tease Mitchell for the rest of his life, until her eyes caught his computer screen. Open on the monitor was a photo of her. An agonizing silence filled the room. Haneul quickly wished him luck and sprinted away. Min-cheol panicked, shouting at her to stop and that she had completely misunderstood. He felt deeply humiliated, but desperately wanted to explain himself. In reality, while Min-cheol was certainly the type who might forget to lock his door since he lived alone, he would never use a photo of his friend for something like that. He had come home 20 minutes earlier, still annoyed at Haneul's harsh words. Just as he was about to start playing video games, he received a notification from a friend telling him to check his email, as he had sent him a cool video. He sat down at his computer, thinking that if the video featured a girl with enticing curves, he would certainly enjoy it. In reality, it turned out to be a clip from a rather intriguing film. Liking what he saw, he began watching with keen interest. Realizing he should lock the door, Min-cheol got up to secure it, only to find the lock was broken. Figuring no one would burst in anyway, he sat back down at his desk, leaned into his chair, and decided to relax. Just as he was getting into it, his messaging app started bursting with notifications. Distracted and annoyed, he saw that Haneul was spamming him with messages. He muted the chat so he wouldn't be disturbed, but as he did, he noticed she had changed her profile picture. Curious, he zoomed in to take a closer look, thinking she looked a bit strange in her new avatar. Soon, the sounds of moans from the video pulled his attention back. In his distraction, he resumed what he was doing without realizing he had left her enlarged profile picture open on his screen. He had simply forgotten to close it. Back in the present, Min-cheol was babbling in a panic, desperately trying to explain what had actually happened. Haneul was overwhelmed with mixed emotions and had no desire to hash things out right then. She mumbled that it was time for her to head home, thanked him for talking to her, and made a move to leave. She had already opened the door and said they could talk later when Min-cheol called out her name again. Haneul glanced back furtively, wondering what else he could possibly say. She felt genuinely embarrassed for interrupting him and discovering something so private. Min-cheol looked at her with eyes brimming with tears, sincerely insisting that he wasn't lying and that everything he said was the truth. He asked her why she wouldn't believe him. Unable to answer, Haneul simply left his room and the house. Standing outside in utter confusion, she didn't know what to do. She wanted to believe him, but what she had seen had deeply shaken her. Holding her head in her hands, she felt terrible for driving her friend to tears. How could things have gotten so out of hand? The weekend flew by. Sitting in her classroom, Haneul reflected on how Min-cheol hadn't contacted her once since the incident. On one hand, it was expected. On the other, she couldn't stop thinking about him crying in front of her. He had to have been sincere. She hadn't seen him cry since elementary school. Her thoughts were shattered by her friend Min-ji, who clapped her hands right in front of Haneul's face. Min-ji asked why she was still sitting there when everyone else had already left. Unsure of how to respond, Haneul realized that after spending the entire weekend in total isolation, she desperately wanted her friend's perspective on what to do about Min-cheol. Deciding to leave out the embarrassing details, Haneul framed the situation as a problem her imaginary friend was facing. Meanwhile, Min-cheol was sprawled out in his friend's dorm room. His friend was worried about him staying over the entire weekend, anxious that he might get evicted if management found out an unauthorized guest was staying there. The friend asked Min-cheol why he wasn't hanging out with that girl from the media department, since he usually went to see her every day. Min-cheol squirmed on the bed, feeling deeply uncomfortable at the mere mention of Haneul. Closing his eyes in resentment, he mumbled to himself that he should have wedged something against his door or never given her the password to his apartment in the first place. Then it struck him. If it weren't for the video his friend had sent him, none of this would have happened. Snapping out of his slump, Min-cheol lunged at his friend and began playfully roughing him up. Feeling oddly relieved, he let his friend go and sat back on the bed. He picked up his phone, opened Haneul's profile, and began scrolling through her photos until he came across a picture of the two of them together. Their friendship truly meant the world to him. As much as they bickered, she was incredibly dear to him. Resting his head on his hand, Min-cheol pondered what his next move should be, haunted by the memory of the look on her face as she had bolted out of his apartment. At the same time, Haneul was sitting outside with Min-ji, finishing her story about her fictional friend. To make sure she had the story straight, Min-ji repeated it back to her. "So, guy number one said something ambiguous to your friend, So she went to guy number two's house to figure out what it meant, only to catch him in a super embarrassing situation. Internally, Minji was well aware that Haneul was a terrible liar. Guy number two was obviously Min-cheol, though she wondered who guy number one was. Minji asked, what exactly did she see? Was he naked? Haneul replied that he was almost naked. Minji shook her head and called her stupid, pointing out that she could have easily just gone online to Google what guy number one's comment meant in the first place. Haneul froze in shock. How had she been so dense? Why hadn't she just used the internet? Depressed, she didn't even notice that her crestfallen expression completely gave away that the story was about her. Minji noted that everyone knew she and Min-cheol had been best friends for a long time, assuring her that if one of them just made the first move, they would make up and everything would go back to normal. Haneul realized her friend was right. Since Min-cheol had been so raw and sincere with her, and since she had run away so abruptly, she felt it was her responsibility to approach him first. Minji was glad to help, cheerfully pretending she hadn't noticed how the conversation had seamlessly shifted from a fictional friend to real life. Suddenly, Minji spotted Min-cheol walking by in the distance and urged Haneul to go make up with him right now. Haneul jumped up, thanked her friend, promised to catch up later, and sprinted after him. Her heart pounded against her chest as she ran down the street. She felt terrible for running away earlier, especially when he had been sincere enough to cry. Knowing how hard it would be for him to initiate contact, she was determined to catch up, apologize for the misunderstanding, and fix their friendship. The classroom was empty. The girl was down to her underwear, her knee pressed between the guy's legs, feeling something hard beneath her. Min-cheol lay flat on the floor while Haneul sat straddling him. Both were breathing heavily, staring at each other in utter shock. Moments earlier, Haneul was running across campus trying to catch Min-cheol, calling out his name. When he turned around and saw her, panic seized him. What does this crazy girl want from me? He thought, immediately turning on his heel and sprinting away. Haneul yelled after him, asking why he was running, while Min-cheol shouted back, asking why she was chasing him. She yelled that she needed to talk to him and picked up her pace. Min-cheol felt uneasy, unsure of what she wanted but doubting it was anything good. Focusing entirely on Min-cheol, Haneul didn't notice her surroundings and kept yelling for him to stop. Suddenly, she collided head-on with a male student walking toward her, who was engrossed in his phone and hadn't seen her coming either. Min-cheol stopped in his tracks and turned around, frozen in place. The collision had caused the student's sweet drink to spill all over Haneul, leaving her completely soaked and sticky. The wet fabric made her t-shirt entirely see-through. Both Haneul and the student began apologizing profusely, she for bumping into him, and he for ruining her shirt. As they spoke, the guy couldn't take his eyes off her drenched, translucent top. He offered to exchange phone numbers so he could reimburse her for the ruined shirt. Haneul thought it was a nice gesture, wanting to replace his spilled drink as well. Suddenly, Min-cheol materialized, thrust his bag against her chest to cover her up, and handed it to her. Grabbing her by the arm, he pulled her away before she could continue the conversation, announcing that he was taking her to their club room to change. He cast a chilling, menacing glare back at the guy, who was left standing in complete bewilderment without her number. The club room was completely empty since classes were over for the day. Haneul asked why he had brought her there, and Min-cheol retorted, "Were you really planning on walking back to the dorm looking like that?" Haneul hesitated, mentioning she could have just used his bag to cover herself, but Min-cheol insisted on lending her one of their team jerseys, given that her own shirt was hopelessly ruined. Haneul apologized for the trouble. Min-cheol paused for a second before continuing to search for a shirt, quietly muttering that it was fine. Looking down at herself, Haneul realized she really did need to change. She was sticky, and her underwear was completely visible. Remembering all the times in the past when she had casually changed in front of Min-cheol without a second thought, she figured taking off her shirt in front of him now wouldn't be a big deal. She pulled off her soaked t-shirt, but then realized she should probably warn him so things wouldn't feel awkward. Turning to him, she told him not to look until she had the new shirt on. At that exact moment, the club room door swung open, and Mitchell's classmate walked in, calling out a greeting. Mitchell turned around in sheer horror. If his classmate took another step, he would see a half-naked Haneul. Terrified, Haneul pressed her back against the wall, internally screaming at her terrible luck. Acting instantly, Mitchell marched toward his classmate, who was about to suggest grabbing a drink together. Mitchell threw his arm around his friend's shoulders, physically blocking him from stepping any further into the room, and insisted they go on without him today. Glaring intensely, he tried to usher him out. Confused, the friend asked Mitchell to let him go so he could drop off his gear in the room first. Mitchell gave him a terrifying look and offered to put the things away for him. With cold sweat running down his back, Mitchell prayed his friend would just leave. Yielding to the bizarre intensity, the guy handed over his gear and left. Mitchell peeked out into the hallway to ensure the coast was clear, then stepped back inside and locked the door behind him. Letting out a massive sigh of relief, he thought to himself that they had just narrowly avoided total disaster. "Haneul," he called out, walking toward where she had been standing, but the space was empty. He looked around in confusion, wondering where she could have vanished to. Suddenly, a nearby locker door creaked open. Inside sat Haneul, squeezed into the tight space with a deeply disgruntled look on her face. Mitchell stared at her. "Why are you sitting in the locker?" Blushing furiously, Haneul admitted in deep embarrassment that she was stuck and couldn't get out. Mitchell burst out laughing so hard he started tearing up. Wiping his eyes, he cracked that he'd been telling her to exercise for years, teasingly calling her a piglet. Haneul remained wedged in the locker, her knees pressed to her chest and her head hung low, feeling utterly pathetic. Trying not to make her feel any worse, Mitchell covered his eyes as Haneul shrieked at him to just help her out. Mitchell grabbed her hands and began pulling her toward him, teasing her and telling her to try harder. Suddenly, Haneul popped out of the locker like a cork. She felt a brief moment of relief until she realized she was flying straight toward him. The two crashed onto the floor, with Haneul landing directly on top of Mitchell, who froze in surprise, wishing he could go blind right then and there. Haneul froze as well, horrified by how the situation looked, half naked, straddling her best friend on the floor. Suddenly, the doorknob rattled. Haneul broke out in goosebumps of pure terror. It was Mitchell's classmate returning. Standing outside, he couldn't understand why Mitchell had locked the classroom door. Panicking, Haneul ducked down low, completely unaware that she was pressing her chest directly against Mitchell's face. Smothered beneath her, Mitchell found it nearly impossible to breathe. Haneul didn't even notice him gasping for air underneath her, listening in sheer horror to the knocking and the requests to open up. She frantically tried to figure a way out of the disaster. Mitchell tried to tell her to move, but he was disastrously short on air. His eyes flared with frustration, until a strange realization hit him. Haneul was straddling him, her leg wedged between his, and his face was buried in her chest. His body reacted traitorously to the image flashing through his mind. He silently pleaded with himself not to react, but his male instincts proved stronger. Finally, the noise outside the door stopped. Haneul lifted herself off his face, leaving Mitchell astonished at the sight of his beautiful, half-naked friend right in front of him. In that moment, Mitchell's mind flashed back to their middle school days. They had been sitting in class, teasing each other as usual, when a classmate asked if they were really not dating. Both had insisted that they didn't view each other that way, they were just good friends. Their classmate looked at them with skepticism, warning them not to be so certain, and asked Mitchell what he would do if he ever ended up seeing Haneul as a girl. Smirking smugly, Mitchell had declared that if that day ever came, he would cut off both of his balls. Haneul had eyed him suspiciously, remarking that she was sure he couldn't come up with anything smarter than that, adding that if she ever fell in love with him, she would shave her head completely bald. Mitchell had teased her back, pointing out that he put his manhood on the line while she only risked a haircut, asking if she was afraid she might actually fall for him. Haneul had endured the teasing until she exploded, pounding him with her fists and screaming that he simply pissed her off. And that annoyance was the only emotion she would ever feel for him. Back in the present, Mitchell tried to break Haneul out of her frozen trance. Reaching up with both hands, he tried to push her away by her shoulders. Suddenly, Haneul noticed how toned and defined his abs were. Mitchell's face flushed bright red, making him look strikingly attractive. Embarrassed, he muttered that he had only locked the door so she wouldn't have to worry about someone walking in on her, desperately wanting her to get off him. Haneul remembered that he had blushed the exact same way when he tried to explain himself back at his apartment, and she caught herself thinking that she actually liked that look on him. Pushing her further, Mitchell wheezed that he couldn't breathe. Haneul finally snapped back to reality, realizing she was still straddling him, and quickly apologized. Mitchell told her not to overthink it and apologized for the awkward situation. Only then did the full picture hit Haneul, and blushing furiously, she scrambled to get up as fast as possible. Backing away too sharply, she lost her balance and crashed into a storage cabinet. A cascade of heavy books tumbled off the shelves and landed right on top of her. Mitchell sat up, exclaiming that she was completely crazy for jumping on him and nearly suffocating him with her chest. He tossed a team jersey at her, telling her to get dressed quickly and put an end to her exhibitionist antics. While Haneul pulled the shirt over her head, Mitchell tried to recover his composure, glad he had managed to keep his dignity intact. He still couldn't believe she had actually turned him on, thinking how foolish it was. She was far too careless, he thought. She shouldn't be stripping down so easily, even if it was just around him. Once the jersey was on, Haneul turned to him. Mitchell stood with his arms crossed, affecting an expression of complete indifference. Sincerely, Haneul apologized for running away from his apartment the other day, explaining that she knew she was wrong, and that's why she had chased after him today. She just wanted to tell him that. Mitchell looked at her in bewilderment, unsure of how to process her directness, as he hadn't expected her to bring up the incident first. Smiling, Haneul patted him on the back, teasing that her muscles were going to be sore because of him, and suggested they forget the whole thing and go back to being friends like before. Saying goodbye, she headed out the door. Left behind, Mitchell wondered if things really could just go back to the way they were. Later on, Haneul was working on an animation homework assignment alongside Minji. Both girls were exhausted, with a mountain of work still ahead of them. Nearby, a couple of their classmates were groaning, overwhelmed by having to complete an animation project on top of their movie reviews. Minji sighed in desperation, complaining that Haneul was lucky because she could draw so well. Haneul noted that she had to do everything on paper by hand because she didn't know how to use 3D software. Truthfully, Haneul was finding it almost impossible to concentrate. The recent events had thrown her completely off balance. As she tried to focus on drawing individual body parts, an image suddenly flashed in her mind. A flushed, flustered Mitchell, his intense eyes and his strong hands. Haneul blushed instantly. The sudden wave of heat frightened her. She bolted up from her seat, announced that she needed to step out immediately, and rushed out of the room. In the restroom, Haneul splashed cool water over her face, but the image of Mitchell refused to fade. Feeling a sudden flush of arousal, she scolded herself harshly, unable to accept that she could actually feel attracted to that jerk. Desperately waving her hands in front of her face as if to brush the thought away, she tried to rationalize it. She was just affected because she didn't have a boyfriend, and he happened to be the only guy around. Meanwhile, Mitchell was lying on his bed at home, reflecting on what had happened in the clubroom. The memory of Haneul pressed against him lingered in his mind. She had felt so warm, soft, and seductive. Covering his eyes with his palms, he scolded himself for thinking such thoughts, wondering if he had lost his mind and why his body had reacted so intensely. He was completely unaccustomed to feeling this kind of desire toward Haneul. He tried to reassure himself that it was just a natural physiological response to seeing an attractive girl. It was about basic biology, not her specifically. But then he wondered to himself if she had always been that well endowed. He definitely found her attractive. Cursing himself for the thought, he rolled around on his bed, trying to shake off the obsession, ultimately wondering what she was up to right now. At that exact moment, Haneul made up her mind and called her friend, asking if she could join the upcoming blind date. Meanwhile, Mitchell lay in bed, contemplating calling Haneul to invite her to dinner the next day. Haneul asked Minji to help her get ready for the date. Minji was surprised, wondering why she had suddenly changed her mind after showing zero interest when Seohyui first brought it up. Minji asked Haneul to look up so she could apply fake eyelashes, while Haneul explained that ever since starting university, her life had been nothing but lectures and homework. She simply wanted to meet new people. Minji agreed that it would be good for her to get out. Minji sent Haneul to change so they could style her hair afterward. When Haneul emerged, she asked how she looked. Without looking up at first, Minji told her not to waste too much effort on a first date, but when she finally looked, she was horrified. Haneul looked terrible, lacking any sense of style or proportion. Chuckling at the sight, Minji took charge and began picking out clothes from her own wardrobe for her friend. When they met up with Seohyui and her friends, the girls stood in admiration. Haneul looked incredibly cute and stylish, and they showered her with compliments, asking why she didn't dress like this all the time. If she did, every guy on campus would be at her feet. They urged her along, saying the guys were already waiting. Suddenly, Haneul's phone rang. It was Min-cheol. She wondered what he wanted and hesitated over whether to answer, but when her friends called out to her, she decided she would just return his call later. The girls walked into the cafe and cheerfully waved to the group of guys, apologizing for being a bit late. The guys stood up to greet them, all looking friendly and handsome. The girls joked that the physical education majors should consider themselves lucky to meet girls from the media department, while Seohyui mentally noted how attractive the guys were. Haneul walked in last and greeted everyone. The guys were instantly captivated by her beauty, finding her exceptionally cute. One of the guys suggested they all sit down, and since they were all the same age, drop the formalities and speak casually. A guy named Ki Bonggu offered everyone a drink. As Haneul went to take a sip, Bonggu stopped her, explaining that she was supposed to clink glasses with everyone before drinking. Having never gone out drinking before, Haneul had no idea about alcohol etiquette. As the group laughed and drank together, Haneul felt a bit out of her element, finding it difficult to mingle freely with strangers. An hour later, however, she was completely drunk. She found that she really enjoyed soju, but because she had never had it before, she didn't realize how strong it was and quickly became intoxicated. Suddenly, one of the guys handed her a glass of water, gently warning her that if she overdid it, she would feel terrible in the morning. Haneul found the gesture extremely sweet. Remembering that his name was Seong-hyun, she thanked him, thinking he was really cute. Shortly after, Ki Bonggu suggested they play a drinking game. Haneul had heard of the game before but had never actually played it. Looking at the pile of bottle caps on the table, they set up the game. A drunken Haneul boldly accepted the challenge, claiming she could win in a single try. Seong-hyun leaned in close and whispered in her ear, giving her a tip on how best to flick the metal cap tab. Haneul flicked it with full force, sending the tab whistling right past Seong-hyun's ear. He sat there in shock, realizing he had narrowly avoided getting hit. Delighted by her win, Haneul turned to Seong-hyun and clapped her hands, crediting his advice for her victory. Seong-hyun suddenly asked if he could ask her a personal question. Why had she come on a blind date if she already had a boyfriend? Haneul blinked in surprise, asking what made him think that. Seong-hyun explained that there was a very popular guy at the university who was constantly seen walking around with her, asking if they were dating. Haneul balked at the suggestion, but Seong-hyun added that part of the reason so many people on campus recognized her was precisely because she was always seen with him. Haneul felt a sudden pang of frustration. She really didn't have a boyfriend because Min-cheol was always hanging around her. One of the girls laughed, clarifying that Haneul and Min-cheol were just childhood friends. Haneul chimed in, insisting there was zero romance between them, explaining that they were close simply because they had known each other since birth and shared no secrets. As the words left her mouth, the vivid memory of catching Min-cheol in his room during his private moment flashed through her mind. They really didn't have secrets, and now she was horrified at herself for constantly remembering it. Suddenly, everything in her surroundings began to remind her of what Min-cheol had been doing. At a nearby table, a guy was vigorously shaking a bottle of red pepper paste, and her mind immediately drew the connection. Haneul's mind obligingly provided a recent, unwanted image. At another table, a young man was shaking a pepper shaker over his food. It felt as though the entire universe was mocking her. Determined to drink herself into a stupor, Haneul grabbed a bottle of soju and began chugging it straight from the neck. Eventually, she collapsed, dropping her head onto the table. Her phone vibrated in her pocket. Pulling it out, she saw a text from Min-cheol offering to grab dinner together after his shift. Staring at the screen, Haneul felt a surge of resentment. Here he was, acting completely normal, while she had dragged herself out on a blind date and gotten wasted just to get him out of her head. Her spiraling thoughts were interrupted by Seong-hyun, who asked if she was feeling all right or if her head hurt. Mentioning that the rest of the group had stepped outside for fresh air and hangover cures, he noticed a bump on her forehead. The young man placed a gentle hand on her shoulder and leaned in close to check on her. Haneul lay there with a glazed, disoriented look, her mind struggling to process how close his face was getting to hers. Suddenly, the entire table shook from a heavy impact. Forcing her head up, Haneul blinked, convinced she was hallucinating. Kim Min-cheol was standing right in front of her, looking thoroughly displeased. Announcing menacingly that he had brought their beer, he glared down at her. Even in her drunken haze, Haneul couldn't help but think about how handsome he looked. Just then, the rest of the group returned, laughing and chatting about how refreshing the night air was. One of the girls noted that they should have brought Haneul outside too, since she was clearly wasted. As they approached the table, they stopped in their tracks, recognizing Min-cheol. Still trying to figure out if she was dreaming, Haneul blurted out loud that Min-cheol was handsome. Overwhelmed, she decided her best option was to pass out again and dropped her head back toward the table. Before her face hit the wood, she felt something warm and soft catch her. It was Min-cheol's palm. Haneul stared up at him in surprise. "Why are you banging your head against the table?" Min-cheol asked, amused. "Are you okay? How much did you drink?" As their friends watched the interaction closely, the girls hesitantly revealed that she had downed about a bottle of soju. Min-cheol was shocked. Haneul had never touched anything stronger than beer, and even then, she suffered from terrible hangovers. He immediately began lecturing her for being so reckless, warning her how awful she was going to feel tomorrow. Haneul pouted, deeply annoyed that he was nagging her like a mother. Min-cheol rummaged through his apron pocket, while Haneul continued to mutter under her breath, until something hard and cold pressed against her forehead. She yelped as he handed her an anti-hangover drink, telling her to finish it and never drink like that again before heading back to work. The moment he walked away, the entire table erupted into chatter about him, swooning over his celebrity-like looks. Haneul sat there, feeling tense and restless. Excusing herself, she announced she was going outside for fresh air. Seong-hyun watched her leave with a watchful eye. Once outside, Haneul spotted Min-cheol throwing out the trash and called out to him, still thoroughly annoyed. When he turned around, she noticed something white sticking out of his mouth and demanded to know why he hadn't told her he smoked. "It's a chupa chups," Min-cheol replied flatly. "You need to sober up." Her anger flaring again, she demanded to know why he hadn't mentioned he worked here. Min-cheol casually reminded her that he actually had. Smirking, he cockily asked if she was just embarrassed because he had caught her flirting with another guy. As Haneul fumed, Min-cheol continued to tease her, joking that any guy willing to date a girl like her must be remarkably pretentious, so he'd do her a favor and pretend he didn't see anything. Livid, Haneul thrust the hangover drink back at him, declaring that she didn't want anything he hadn't paid for himself. Insulted, Min-cheol asked if she was implying he stole it. Haneul immediately felt a twinge of guilt for accusing him. Snatching the drink back, Min-cheol pouted, saying he had changed his mind anyway. He complained that he had been genuinely worried about her, called her only to be ignored, found her drunk, and was now being accused of theft, so she clearly didn't deserve his help. Haneul pouted back, knowing she was in the wrong and not actually wanting to fight. To make amends, she popped the top and quickly chugged the entire can. Min-cheol stepped closer, suddenly noticing her face. "Did you actually do your makeup?" he asked, surprised. Uncomfortable under his intense gaze, Haneul mumbled that Minji had helped her put it on. Mitchell scrutinized her for a moment before deadpanning. Well, you can't make a silk purse out of a sow's ear. Hurt by his bluntness, Haneul snapped at him to look in a mirror first. Unlike you, I've always been a silk purse, Mitchell retorted smoothly. Haneul gritted her teeth, internally admitting it was hard to argue with that. He really was ridiculously handsome. Then be a nice purse, she yelled, smacking him with all her strength. Inside, the group was still talking about Mitchell, with the girls gushing over his looks while Seong-hyun listened intently. Bonggu brought up that there was another insanely handsome guy at their university, to which one of the girls confirmed he was talking about Jae-sunb, a senior in their department. When Bonggu expressed a desire to befriend him, Seong-hyun chimed in, revealing he actually knew him through his older brother. He added that there were a lot of wild rumors surrounding Jae-sunb, immediately catching the girls' attention as they begged him to spill the details. Outside, Mitchell checked his phone and noted that his break was over. Haneul was surprised that 15 minutes had already flown by. Mitchell admitted he hadn't noticed the time either, as being around each other always felt so natural. So, do you actually like any of those guys in there? Mitchell asked casually. Haneul instantly bristled, glaring at him. Even if I do, why do you care? If you actually like someone, he'd be your first real boyfriend, Mitchell said. Which means I'll have to inspect him to see if he's good enough for you. Haneul immediately started swatting at his back, telling him not to do anything weird. Mitchell laughed gleefully, thoroughly enjoying messing with her. He gave her an affectionate pat on the head, repeating with a grin that if she ever got a boyfriend, her Appa asterisk would definitely put him to the test. Deep down, Haneul was secretly touched by his concern, though she reflexively flashed him a middle finger and told him to get lost. Walking back inside, Haneul reflected on how long it had been since they had just hung out and bantered like that. She felt genuinely happy that she had come out tonight. Her thoughts were interrupted when she ran into Seong-hyun waiting for her. He smiled, mentioning he was getting worried because she had been gone so long, and asked if they could talk privately for a moment. Inside, the rest of the group was sitting in shocked silence over what Seong-hyun had revealed about Jae-sunb. It was hard to reconcile his clean-cut image with rumors that he habitually took girls to cheap motels, but the gossip was too scandalous to ignore. Meanwhile, night had fallen over the city. Inside a motel room, a young couple was together, but Jae-sunb lay staring blankly at the ceiling, completely disengaged from the girl straddling him. Annoyed by his total lack of presence, the girl leaned down and complained, asking why he was acting so distant when he was the one who insisted on meeting up. When she asked why he was being so cold, Jae-sunb muttered that he was just trying to remember something important he had forgotten. Suddenly, he sat up abruptly, realizing he had homework due in a few hours. Pulling his pants back on, he headed straight for the door. The girl watched in utter disbelief and fury as he walked out without a second thought. Reaching his apartment, Jae-sunb immediately powered up his computer to finish the assignment. As he went through his USB drives, he spotted the one Haneul was supposed to take. Confused, he checked the drives again and realized the flash drive containing the pre-1990's movie was still sitting on his desk. He chuckled to himself, wondering what on earth was actually on the drive Haneul had taken home. Back outside the venue, Seong-hyun asked Haneul if she was cold, to which she shook her head. As they chatted, Seong-hyun remarked that anyone could see how close she and Mitchell were. Haneul felt a bit self-conscious, knowing their closeness often scared off potential suitors, but she explained that they were just childhood friends. Seong-hyun then asked directly if there were any romantic feelings between them. Haneul immediately protested, reassuring him that Mitchell was purely like a brother to her. Seong-hyun confessed that he had been worried because they looked so much like a couple from the outside, adding that if she already had a boyfriend, she wouldn't have agreed to come on the date. Smiling warmly, Seong-hyun admitted that he really liked her and asked her to be his girlfriend. The sudden, direct confession caught Haneul completely off guard. As she stood there frozen, unsure of how to respond so soon after meeting him, Mitchell stood hidden behind a nearby wall, having overheard the entire exchange. He knew he should feel happy for his best friend, but instead, an overwhelming bitterness washed over him. The next morning, the bus stop was deserted except for two figures. Min-ji spotted Mitchell and called out a greeting, asking if he was heading home to visit his parents as well. When he confirmed he was, she asked why Haneul wasn't with him. Mitchell let out a heavy sigh. She's probably spending time with her boyfriend right now. Min-ji shrieked so loudly Mitchell nearly lost his hearing, frantically firing off questions about who the guy was, where he came from, and when this had happened. Mitchell explained he didn't know the details and had only found out by accident. Min-ji immediately whipped out her phone to text Haneul, nodding that if she didn't reply, she was definitely with the guy. A stray campus cat wandered by, and Mitchell knelt down to pet it. Min-ji observed him closely, noticing the subtle tension he was trying so hard to hide. "How do you actually feel about this?" Min-ji asked pointedly. "You used to chase away every guy who even looked at her and acted like a total tyrant. Why the sudden change of heart?" Mitchell bristled. "I was just protecting her from scumbags." "Is there any guy you actually approve of?" she pressed. Mitchell sighed heavily, looking away. He vividly remembered Haneul screaming at him that she had no friends or boyfriend because of his interference, and the guilt still weighed on him. He told Min-ji that Haneul was an adult who could make her own choices. Then, his expression darkened into a chilling glare. "But if this so-called boyfriend does anything stupid, I'm going to destroy him." At that exact moment, Haneul was staring at a tiny, fluffy hamster, the cutest thing she had ever seen. She was visiting Seong-hyun's apartment, watching his pet while he prepared snacks in the kitchen. Haneul felt completely out of her depth, unsure of how to act. They had agreed to give dating a try, though she felt it was too early to officially call themselves a couple. She simply wanted to get to know him better. She was also self-conscious about her appearance, as Min-ji hadn't been at the dorms to help her get ready. Still, she rationalized that even if things didn't work out after a few dates, it would still be a good experience. Pulling out her laptop, she prepared to look for a movie so they could work on their assignment together. Seong-hyun handed her a soda, admitting he didn't know much about film analysis, but promising to do his best to help her. Haneul was touched by his willingness to engage in her major's coursework despite being in a completely different department. When Seong-hyun sat down right beside her, her heart raced. Their shoulders were practically touching. She had never been this physically close to a guy in a private setting before. Nervous, she quickly clicked on a movie file from the flash drive, hit play, and turned up the volume. Instantly, an explicit adult film blasted onto the screen. Haneul turned pale with absolute horror, freezing in place. Seong-hyun stared at the monitor in utter shock, his face flushing bright red. Haneul slammed the laptop lid shut with lightning speed. Hiding her burning face, she stammered out, "Cinematic masterpieces come in many genres, but I definitely wasn't trying to show you that." Seong-hyun cleared his throat awkwardly, reassuring her that he understood and not to worry. Panicking internally, Haneul realized she must have grabbed the wrong flash drive from Jae-sun's place in her rush to leave. She recognized the film immediately. It was the exact same one she had accidentally watched at her friend's sleepover back in high school.